Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon on a topic I hope will be of extraordinary interest to you, either directly or indirectly. And this is a topic of conversation that dominates so much in the realm of national or economic security, and it's an issue that is not only near and dear to the hearts of the U.S., but also to Canada as well. And my presentation is North American Critical Minerals at the Crossroads. Crossroads are those areas of intersection where directions can change rapidly or they can take much longer term. For those of you who do not know who I am, on the screen it says Managing Director of Global Mineral Strategies, LLC. But up until December 31st of last year, I was the Director of the Office of Critical Minerals and Metals at the U.S. Department of Commerce in Washington. I retired at the end of 40 years of U.S. government service. I'm probably one of the few people that can actually say I served for every president from Reagan to Biden and have seen quite a few eddies and currents and, quite honestly, more than a few crossroads in a number of areas, not the least of which is critical minerals. I want to talk about at the crossroads, beginning with a topic of how did we get here? Because if you don't know how you got where you are, you're clueless in terms of where you're going. And for the United States, but also for Canada, it begins with an irritating, frustrating issue that took 50 years to get here. And unfortunately, we don't have 50 years to solve. Things are changing too rapidly, and geopolitical as well as climate-related changes are happening and developing and forcing adjustments faster than we can adjust to them. For the United States, this is a growing issue that has basically dogged the U.S. really for more than a quarter of a century, and that's net import reliance. What is that? It is an intense import dependency on foreign sources. Now, that by itself is not the concern as much as it is who you're dependent upon. So when you look at the screen there, you see that of the 50 minerals that are on the U.S. critical minerals list developed by the U.S. Geological Survey, of the 50 that are on there, 15 of those 50, the United States is 100%, not 99 and 3/4, or as they used to say in the old Ivory soap commercial, 99 and 44 100%. It's 100%. There are no alternative sources for these critical minerals. And it is not news for anyone in this room that China has continued to deepen its chokehold on many critical minerals. Notice the underlined word there. It's not minerals themselves. It's the supply chains associated with them. And so it's not just the material in the ground, it's extraction, its separation, its processing, and its advancement into finished goods. This is an issue that has been especially exacerbated since China joined the WTO in the 1990s. And unfortunately, how did we get here? It is the slow progress that it takes to establish these projects, not just the design and the engineering, but the funding. It is the finding of partnerships, and quite honestly, it's the technologies. And there is what I see on the screen there, as I put, is the growing industrial, trade, and political frustration in how long this takes. There's an alarming report that came out last year. We've been making progress in this space, but as you see on the screen there, the U.S. Geological Survey released its 2023 annual mineral summaries, and to see a fact in there that I think shocked everyone. And that was that in that report, it showed that there had been progress made, but the United States was more import dependent than ever. And historical records showed that despite progress, the United States was more import dependent than ever on these critical minerals, which are essential to a whole host of national security, manufacturing, industrial, and energy end uses. It's not intended to be a story of melancholy, it's a story of reality. That was the chart that the U.S. Geological Survey released the day that it released its report. Notice there was slight declines a few years ago, but the numbers moved up back to their traditional level as they've been for some time. And again, for the United States, for Canada, for other countries that are serious about this supply chain resilience issue, this isn't necessarily the best marketing talking point that you would ever want to utilize, but that's what it looks like visually. This is the other one now. When I was the director of the Office of Critical Minerals and Metals, I kid you not, this chart was up on the wall right next to my computer. Now, why? Right next to the left was my wife's picture. This was the picture to the right. And what is this? If you can see, and I appreciate that the letters are small, and I'm sure that the presentation can be made available, but what I want you to look at on the chart is the three colors. And what you see, again, look at that far left column, and you see those 15 critical minerals that the United States is 100% import reliant. But the reds show the import reliance on China, and yellow is Russia. And so when you see the overpreponderance of dependency on two countries that are not at the source of global stability, the United States, under the Biden administration, groups these two countries along with two others as FEOC, foreign entities of concern. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But this was every day the motivation of why we do what we do. And this is hard work. If it was easy work, it would have been done by everybody already. But it's not easy. It's hard work. And only by the kinds of relationships that Canada and the United States, along with other allies and partners, can develop, can this be a situation where a long-term resilient solution can be found. But every day this was up on my wall right next to my computer. This is what we're all about. Where are we now? Well, again, as we're saying, like, this is how we got here. This is where we are now. And I'm the guy who is always going to look for the silver lining in a gray, clouded sky. Always going to look for that. Why? Because you need the positive messaging. And I will say, friends, we need to be better about the positive messaging. I'm not talking about happy talk or some kind of motivational speaking. I'm talking about the celebration of great accomplishment. Think about how much progress has been made in so many areas like this since 2019. So many advancements, so many projects that are making significant strides, the engagement and the enthusiasm and the energy of the private sector. So there are things to really celebrate, and I think we have to do a better job at celebrating those accomplishments. But we also have to be honest in the conversation. If it's a clouded sky, there's more clouds than sun. And we have to continue to look at the realities of what we're dealing with, such as difficulties in changing procurement patterns. For more than 25 years, there was a complacency in establishing what we call SPOF, which is a single point of failure, where companies were too eager to rely upon one source of material. Folks, that's just lousy business. Because all it takes is that one single point of failure to fail, and you're what? You're out of business. Or you're desperately seeking materials from places you'd rather not at prices you can't afford. And so we've seen how difficult it is for downstream consumers to rid themselves of familiar purchasing patterns. We'll talk about that in a little bit later. The fourth area that you see on there is the slow progress. The emphasis on this two words is the word progress. We are seeing progress, but it's slow, and sometimes it's frustrating because it takes longer than we'd like. But drawing capital into this sector is challenging. Why? Because a lot of financing organizations say we've been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, and these projects failed. Why? Because China could flood the market and make your project useless before it ever sees production. And then there is, again, a frustrating issue, particularly for myself as a person with a natural resource background. I came to the government with a degree in wood and paper science and chemical engineering, and I understand the need for resource extraction. But unfortunately, the continuing challenges in trying to not expedite, but just simply reduce the permitting process. The average time to get a mine from proposal to mining is, in the United States, 13 years. It's too long. You can't be competitive in that environment. And then there's the challenges in easing China's dominance. For many years, they said, you want our material, then you sell us your technology. And unfortunately, that is just simply the pathway to disaster, and it has not served us well. And China has the ability to flood with material where projects, again, can't even afford to produce at cost, much less make a profit. And then we saw in 2024 what I call the saber rattling. Chinese are very good at sending a message to the world. We'll punish you if you do wrong by us, as you saw with the slide there talking about gallium, germanium, graphite, and antimony, where they just literally said, we're going to intensify our export controls and turn the spigot, much like they did in 2009, 10, and 11 on rare earths. I think many of you folks will remember. Where else are we now? Well, we're in a position now where the establishment of new technologies, we are probably a quarter of a century behind the Chinese. And I do not believe that there has quite been the will to put the resources at both the public and the private level to make this a process where the rising tides raises all boats. United States, Canada, Japanese, Europeans, all serious about this process, but what sacrifices are prepared to be made? And then there's the growing necessity, I believe, for OEMs or original equipment manufacturers to be further engaged in this process, because you can get all the material you want, but still, what do you ultimately need? Somebody to buy it. You need a customer at the end of the supply chain process. Their growing role is essential in this process if it's to be successful long term. It also means, though, that they may be having to change their own procurement policies. Where do we go from here? Well, I've believed in this for a long time, that there is the need for the next industrial revolution. The old ways of doing business are the old ways. And to survive in this world, the old ways are not going to be successful or sustainable. And that means the U.S. and Canada and fellow partners in this process create and advance new technologies, looking where high efficiency, low carbon and energy efficient materials that are produced with local capabilities, and when the relationships can be forged with allies and partners. Stay on track with the progress that's been made over the last 5 years. This is what I said when I retired, like the amount of progress that's been made in 5 years is phenomenal in this space. But again, it took us 50 years to get here. It's not going to take 5 years to get out. Continue to make the argument, what I call make the argument in the marketplace of ideas. Engage with those in the environmental community and those that have assigned a certain stigma to resource extraction. Even in the 80s, when I graduated from NC State, there was already at that time a growing social opposition to resource extraction. Now you can show them a way where this not only benefits them and the rest of the world, but also can be done in an environmentally sustainable manner. And I believe it's absolutely incumbent upon the United States and Canada to lead the way here. We can do it better than everyone else, with all due respect to our European and Japanese friends. We can do it better. We have to show them the right way to do it, where things such as engagement with local communities, where ESG isn't just 3 letters pulled out of an acronym book, but it actually means that you're producing at a higher standard of environmental and social governance. And then the idea that a North American battery supply chain isn't a talking point, but it is a goal that we work together to accomplish. I turn now to the United States perspective, because this is one that, for myself especially, have been motivating factor since 2019. And I gave great credit to two administrations that rather than being combative over everything, they picked certain strategic areas where their goals were very similar. I was the coordinating author for, as you see on the screen, a federal critical mineral strategy. This is all public, out in the public domain. The Trump administration was given great prosecution over putting this issue out in the public domain. One government said, "Why are you publicizing to the world your weaknesses?" And to which the Trump administration goes, "Like they don't know it already?" This wasn't anything new. It just wasn't one of those things that was talked about. So the Executive Order 1387 compelled the Secretary of Commerce, and I worked at the Commerce Department at that time, to pull together a federal strategy on critical minerals. And you see the 6, notice they're not called chapters. We intentionally called them calls to action. Why? Because this was not intended to be a study that was to go in an archive or in your inbox or in your online directory. It was to be calls to action that motivated and compelled activities going forward, and you can see the 6 areas there. Great credit goes to the Biden administration as well, because the president released his own executive order, and rather than canceling all of the work that had been done by the Trump administration, they updated it. That was the key word. So when Executive Order 14017 came out, I was one of the first people to look exactly what would the relationship would be between the two. And the word was it updated the findings of the previous administration's report. Why? Because the analysis was sound and the recommendations were solid. The Biden administration focused it on very specific areas as it related to continuing to advance and establish, notice, not America's critical minerals, but America's what? Supply chains. Because if there is one thing that COVID pulled back the Band-Aid and ripped off the scab underneath, was just how vulnerable our supply chains are. That needed to be changed if we were to be successful and sustainable. The changing U.S. political landscape, well, this is funny, for me anyway, because when I came up here, obviously I came here with a presentation that was fully developed and completed without knowing what the outcome of Tuesday would be. And I thought, there's no way come Thursday we'll know who the next president is going to be, so I developed a presentation that looked like Switzerland. Right down the middle of the road. Don't show preferences or show any indications either way, just put it right down the middle of the highway. Well, lo and behold, much to my shock, and probably to many of you people in the room, and especially in the United States, a winner was declared Tuesday night / Wednesday morning, actually very early Wednesday morning. We're now North American, still same topic, North American critical minerals at the crossroads. We've seen where we were. We see where we are. Now, where do we go from here? Well, this slide is perhaps the most important one if this is an area of your focus, or if you do trade with the United States or have business and economic connections. It's the Trump administration North Star. In other words, what's the guiding principle? Now you say, how do you know this? Well, this is where I'm hoping that history is the precursor to the future, because this was his focus in the announcement of that executive order, which quite honestly was unbelievably unpopular, because it focused on these areas of vulnerabilities. But 13817, his first executive order, was focused on this idea of an industrial type policy that focuses on the 2 key areas of national security and decoupling from China. Now, this is, even the Trump administration never had an anti-China perspective or position. It was the idea, as I've said earlier, is the over-dependency there. Quite honestly, the United States and China are much too integrated and too dependent on each other. We're that close together, not to the deep relationship that there is between Canada and the United States, but certainly there is a There's an integration, there's a connectivity between the two economies. It was that idea of easing that dependence, of decoupling a lot of the critical supply chains. If there's an overarching principle for the Trump administration, it's national security. That's his North Star. Okay, I will move along very quickly. So where do we go from here? Now, this is where I have the ability to do what I could have never done as a federal employee. And what is that? Well, give prospects of what I think a second Trump administration will look like. You can see these concepts: the strengthening of U.S. national security, energy transformation that doesn't move away entirely but supplements energy transformation to include fossil fuels, because it's a transition. The one perhaps calculated gamble that the Biden administration took was their targets and timetables on EVs and batteries was what? Not unrealistic, they were impossible. It was impossible. And that sent the wrong signal to the marketplace that this is actually going to happen in the time frame that they targeted. EVs, as popular as they are in some places, quite simply, they're just too expensive. And they haven't built up the reliability supply chain that they need. So what do I believe will happen? Strengthening of U.S. national security and energy transformation, and an aggressive trade policy. That just fits his business acumen. Don't forget, if you don't know this about Donald Trump, he is not a politician. He's not a diplomat. He is a business guy. And so he moves with the thinking process of business. Sometimes that results in missteps, but still, that's the thought process. The IRA, I have been asked more questions about the IRA in 48 hours than I did in the 6 years that I was working under the Trump administration and Biden administration in this area. What do I think is going to happen? This is my best understanding based on policy priorities that previously existed. Trump had already said if he had been continued as president after his first term, that hybrids would become more a focus of the energy tax credits, not EVs. It's a shame we didn't have that, because I bought two hybrids during the Biden administration. But anyway, this is what I think we could anticipate. Now, I'm not a member of the transition team. I am not a political appointee, and I don't play one on TV. I'm just telling you from the perspective of having worked for both the Trump and the Biden administrations. Where do I think the U.S.-North American relationship goes? I think there is the recognition for the need of deepening U.S.-Canada relations. One area to highlight on number 3 on the list there is, for those of you who do not know, the very first ever bilateral accord for the United States in the area of critical minerals was with Canada. You can see on the screen there, October 2019, not 5 months after the strategy was released, the Biden administration reached out to the Trudeau administration and forged the relationship that has been in place since then. Thank you guys so much for your time. I hope you found the information useful, and thanks very much. Appreciate it.